Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Steve, finally.
Yes.
Finally, we're talking face to face.
Finally is true because I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yeah. I want to get deep into your investigations on January 6th. You were there that day. I want you to tell your story a little bit, but I want to frame it first because I was actually at the BlazeTV studios on January 7th. And happenstance, I was scheduled to do Glenn Beck's podcast that day. So whatever we were going to talk about, we had to talk about January 6th.
Right.
And I looked at it at the time, from the lens of someone that just saw clips on TV. Happily, I live by the Capitol, but happily, even though we flirted with the idea of walking down there, I'm really glad that I didn't, given my history as a Tea Party organizer.
Right.
But I looked at it at the time, and they're showing you the violent clips, the smashed windows and the activists punching back, or you had no context at the time. And I was thinking to myself, we spent years and so much training teaching Tea Party activists never to take the bait.
Right.
We were deeply schooled in nonviolent direct action, studied the March on Washington and MLK's nonviolent approach to things. And so what I told Glenn that day is that, whatever's going on there, they blew it, because now the left has the narrative that the right is violent. But since then, and this is why I've been not just following your work, but Congressman Thomas Massey's work, someone who I very much respect, I've realized that what I saw on that day was a very one-dimensional perspective about what was going on. And you were in the building that day. Yeah. You were reporting on that, and that has gotten you in very hot water with the Department of Justice. Right. So give me some context for, you're a journalist, and how did you end up there that day, first of all?
I actually came to D.C. That day with another writer, a writer of some esteem, a couple books out. I won't name him right now, but he used to be one of Rush Limbaugh's ghostwriters, has written for Fox programs, has written for Breitbart, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we came to cover the event. Now, I had been, for a year leading up to that, well, the 10 months anyway, this other journalist and myself had been co-writing a book on COVID. So we were tag teaming a book. I was covering more of the science and the details. He was covering the political aspects. And so for me, this was an extension of the travels that I had done during the lockdowns, because I couldn't do anything else other than just travel the country. I went to 28 states during the lockdowns, visiting with my blog followers, doing meetups. If we were in a closed state or city, we would do, meet in a speakeasy, or somebody would unlock a back door of a bar or restaurant, or, something like that. Yeah, obviously in Texas or Florida, we could, meet anywhere we wanted.
It actually feels a little bit funner gathering when it's technically illegal, and some tyrannical mayor, in my case, was telling me you can't gather. I'm like, well, I'm definitely going to gather then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I had just gotten home from about a 2.5-3 month run out traveling, and had time to, wash a load of clothes and repack and head to D.C. So my colleague and I both live in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we took the drive up the night before, met with a couple of other media personalities in our hotel in Arlington the night before, shared some adult beverages, and we're looking forward to the next day of just me. I just was going to do man on the street interviews. I brought my tripod. I had my man on the street microphone, and I was going to listen to what was said in the speeches at the Ellipse, get people's impression, and in fact, if the Kraken was unleashed that day, and if it was going to be, it needed to be that day because it was at the bitter end. That I would get people's reactions. Now, myself, I had never taken a stance on the alleged stolen election. It took me about 22 months after the election before I came around to that thought. But I did want to get people's reactions, and it was exactly what we did. We stood out there in the cold, in the wind, that January morning, 25-mile-an-hour consistent whipping wind that morning. It was an incredible sight. We were standing up on the Washington Monument lawn, and just a sea of people, and thousands, literally tens of thousands of flags whipping in that breeze was something I'd never seen before. It was amazing. And as far as the rest of the event, it was as they say, a nothing burger. The speeches were, Trump was an hour late taking the stage. And we were in such a horrible place. We didn't have a good view of the Jumbotron. The audio was horrible about halfway through the speech, because we knew that there were other scheduled events and stages permitted, legally, by the way, permitted at the Capitol and on the Capitol grounds. We left about halfway through Trump's speech and started working our way that direction so we could get in front of the crowd, get set up somewhere, interview people as they're coming over. Well, by the time we got to the reflection pool there on the west side, we were hearing the sirens approaching the Capitol. And then I could see from quite a distance away, I could see the fluorescent vest of the Metropolitan PD pouring down the stairs onto the lower west terrace. And I looked at my colleague and I went, well, I guess that's where we're going. And we basically broke out in trot. I arrived on the lower west terrace at I turned on my camera at 1:19 p.m. The battle was already adjoined, and it was horrific. I mean, people were getting first aid on both sides of the line. Cops were getting first aid. I saw blood. People on the protester side of the line were getting first aid. People were pressing the line. Some were assaulting cops. Some were taunting cops. I saw an unbelievable amount of fear in these young, unprepared, unequipped Capitol Police officers. I got my camera right up in their face, and I see the fear in their eyes. And so I captured about 45 minutes to an hour of that battle scene on that side. I got hit by pepper spray and tear gas myself over and over again. I took one of the flashbangs that they were launching over the line into the peaceful part of the crowd. One of them exploded about 3 feet from me, and shrapnel hit me in my right knee. I had a bruise there for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, sometime just after 2 o'clock, I saw what I interpreted to be a stand-down order. I later learned, because I've since gotten access to all of the audio, the Capitol Police audio from their radio comms and transcripts and et cetera, et cetera. I've since learned it was a pullback order. I mean, it was a staged pullback order. But as that was happening, people were able to break through up top, which I was not able to see. And then shortly after 2 o'clock, there was a free flow of humanity up underneath the scaffolding that they had set up for the inaugural event. And people were just moving up the stairs with no resistance at all. I eventually got in line, followed them up, and then I saw that hundreds of people were pouring into the Capitol building itself. Cops were standing off to the side. They're on their phones. They're talking in groups. They're probably texting their wife and saying, "Hey, I'm okay, honey," because I'm sure everybody in the nation was seeing this on television.
Yeah.
But they're not offering any resistance. They're not telling anybody to stand down. They're saying you can't. Nobody is saying you can't go in there. And people are just going up the ramp into that northwest, what they called Senate wing door. And that's where I entered. And I was inside the Capitol for 37 minutes doing my job. I did not protest. I did not picket or parade. I wasn't wearing any political gear whatsoever. I had no Trump hat, no political statements on a jacket or shirt or scarf or anything. No flags. I had my camera, my tripod, my backpack with my microphone in there, and I recorded what I could get on camera during my 37 minutes inside the building. And I exited right after I was, I'm not going to say fortunate, it's an tragic situation, but I have the definitive video of Ashley Babbitt's extraction, indeed her body being extracted. She was already gone at that time. They were still working on her, but I saw her on the floor at the south exit of the Capitol. FBI medics were feverishly working on her, but she was gone. And then I posted up outside that door and witnessed the extraction by the EMTs. And then I gave a couple of interviews at WSA 9, and then I hung around for a little while to see if, because the rumor is that Antifa was going to show up, at dark, as they usually do. They didn't. And, of course, then about 5:30, the National Guard troops arrived, and they did push out and pushed everybody out and away from the building. And there was press gathered all around the outside, foreign press. I could hear, I heard Japanese and Swedish and, dozens of languages from the gathered press filming the event. And then it was after curfew at that time. And I figured if other press were here, I'm allowed to be here as well, even though it was after curfew. And then about 7 o'clock, I grabbed an Uber and headed back to Arlington to my hotel.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with BlazeTV. The only place you're going to see this is BlazeTV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. So I want to, and I want to, obviously, your mere presence that day eventually got you in trouble with the DOJ. But the thing that mystified me on that day, and I think I talked about this with Glenn the next day, as a seasoned grassroots organizer, we organized the Taxpayer March on Washington on 9/12/2010. I'm old. I can barely remember these things. And man, we went through months of permitting and security and healthcare and the things that you have to do, and the things that the Park Police and the Capitol Hill Police do in preparation for a mass event. It's a big deal, and it's like their one job. And that day, I'm watching this, and I'm just utterly mystified at how unprepared they seemed. Was it your impression? It sounds like you showed up a little bit later, but I've seen plenty of videos now with the officers waving people in. Were people waved in, or did they, as you described, did the cops eventually just stand down because they couldn't control the crowd? And why are they so unprepared?
Okay.
Because
really,
I know
really,
I know you know more about it now than you did then.
Yeah, really good questions there. And yes, I do know infinitely more now than I knew then. There were a lot of assumptions I made in the first few articles I wrote on this January 6th. This was even after, frame by frame review of my own camera, I made some incorrect assumptions because, first of all, one camera at one angle does not capture the context of an event. The reality is there's actually never an incident where people were waved in by the cops. That's a very famous video. I assumed that was what was happening. But the stand down order happened. It came in at exactly 2 o'clock on the radio comms. And so not all of the cops, if they were on the front line, they couldn't hear because of the roar of the crowd and all that was the chanting and all of that. So this one particular black female cop that you see waving people as the barricades are being pulled back, and she's doing this, there's more angles now of her, and she's actually waving at the other cops to pull back to go up to the top of the steps on the east side. So she heard the comms and was telling them to come with me.
Okay.
So we have that false impression. It's the same thing is true of the breach of many of the doors. A lot of people believe that Capitol Police opened some of those doors for the protesters. That also is incorrect. I've had access to all of that footage. I was one of the first 5 journalists given access to the 41,000 hours worth of CCTV from the Capitol, And I've spent hundreds of hours poring over that video. And one of the most curious things that I had to discover for my own satisfaction was, did that ever happen? There were 7 doors breached. Every single door was breached by a protester. Now, after they were breached, there were incidences where Capitol Police held the doors open and were letting people in because they had a stand-down order.
Okay.
And they were de-escalating. And it was like, and you can even hear them, look, I don't agree with this, but you guys, behave yourself. They were having those kind of conversations with the crowd. And some of them were more friendly. The crowd's walking in, high-fiving some of them, fist-bumping some of them, that sort of thing. And, the guys are doing that. But that doesn't mean that they were invited in. Mm-hmm. But now we get to the key part of what you said. They seemed woefully unprepared. They were not prepared. And now we have an unlimited amount of testimony, especially through trials. We have access to transcripts of what was going on that day. We have, of course, there's a lot of information gained, not only from the January 6th Select Committee that Nancy Pelosi convened. There's a lot of good information that came out of those testimonies. It's hard to get your hands on some of them. Some of them have been highly redacted. Some of them have been absolutely not available. And some of them have been burned and destroyed. But from what we've been able to get our hands on, we now know that Capitol Police particularly were not only unprepared, they were purposefully not prepared. And that's the key. So the question then is, why were they purposely unprepared? So by my own estimation, and I wrote this very, very early on in just the short weeks after January 6th, is that from my estimation, I only saw about 200, maybe 250 actual Capitol Police officers on the grounds of the property that day. That's out of 2,000 uniformed officers that they had at the time. And what I've also learned, and this is from the testimony of, I've interviewed dozens of Capitol Police officers, current, retired, unnamed sources, background, off the record, et cetera, and some whistleblowers. And what we know is that on a day like that, a protest day, where the Capitol Police themselves had issued 6 permits for what they call First Amendment protests on the property, including a couple of stages with PA systems and including with members of Congress that were scheduled to speak on those stages. It's supposed to be all boots on the ground.
By the way, where were the stages? On the back of the Capitol, looking down on the mall?
They were on the east side. That's technically the front, or is that the back? I don't even know what's the front or the back. I know the east and the west.
That's where we were.
Okay,
so I can visualize this.
Yeah, that's on the Supreme Court side, and so they were positioned at different places around there. But there were a total of 6 events permitted, including marches. There were flyers being distributed by some of these event organizers that were saying that they were going to be singing and protesting on the steps. So once those barricades were removed by the early provocateurs, and those barricades had signs on them that said, wasn't "do not enter," it was said "area closed." Big, capital letters. Every section of that bike rack said "area closed." But once those bike racks were removed and those signs are pulled down and they're hidden, by the time I got there, so I arrived where that initial breach was at about 1:15, and Trump is just finishing his speech at that time. Well, the first barricade breach on the west side happened at 12:53, 12:54. Trump still got 20 minutes left of his remarks down at the Ellipse. And as you know, it's depending upon where you're at down there, you're anywhere from a mile to a mile and a half walk to get to the Capitol by then. So I arrived where that breach point was at 1:15. We never saw the first cop. I never saw a cop till I got to the battle line. I never saw, and that was the entire walk over from the Ellipse, so mile plus walk. Never saw a single law enforcement officer. Never saw one at the breach points. The fencing's gone. The signs are gone. It's all been pulled up and moved and hidden as best these provocateurs could do. So thousands and thousands of people entered the quote-unquote restricted space with no knowledge whatsoever. that they were in a restricted space.
My impression, again, this is from day one, is because you could see you're calling them provocateurs, but the people that were violent, they're pushing against the cops and maybe even attacking them and smashing windows. My assumption was that's a small subset of the group itself. And most people are, by the time they get there, they're just wandering in, not even knowing that they're not supposed to be there. Do you think that's right?
It's absolutely correct. And when you say small subset, look, we hear estimates of the size of the people that attended that event that day. Everything from, CNN saying it was only 30,000 people to some of the right-wing bloggers or influencers saying there was 3 million people there that day. I estimate there was somewhere between 250,000 and 400,000.
Yeah.
All right, and I think that's a fair.
I think that's about right.
Yeah.
Then I had to become an expert on size of crowds because the National Park Service doesn't do it anymore because they get into politics.
Right,
yeah.
right. But they know, nonetheless, because they're able to monitor the air travel, the train travel, the highway bus rentals, and all of those bookings, the hotel bookings. They can tell how many people are coming to an event. And this information was not passed along to the frontline officers of the Capitol Police.
You said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said they were purposefully unprepared.
Yes.
Drill down on that.
As I was saying earlier, an event day like this, with 6 First Amendment protests permitted, signed off on by Capitol Police leadership. I have the permits. I have the signatures on those events. They then automatically go into what they would refer to, the frontline guys, as all boots on the ground. All right. And that means everybody. And that means they also have to work double shifts that day. It means the guys that worked the graveyard shift that would normally get off at 7 o'clock, they have to remain on through the next shift. The guys that come in at 7 now work 2 shifts till through the swing shift. If people even remember what those terms are anymore. But the point being is that they only had, according to the testimonies of the guys who have come forward and even testified before committees and before Congress members, have told us that the actual commanders said that they only had access to about 200 to 250 officers that day. And that's out of, as I said, 2,000. All right, so now we have to figure out why. Now we have to start asking those questions.
I'll just insert this. I remember, I wish I would have screenshotted it because I guarantee you this article doesn't exist anymore, but I read an article the day after, or maybe 2 days after, of a Capitol Police officer complaining about being sent home when everybody knew that they needed to be on the ground.
Yes, and that was exactly what was happening. So by protocol, Capitol Police policy, for years and years and years, this goes way, way back, they were being sent home, the guys that got off at 7, and the new guys are coming in on their shift. Now, the next thing that didn't happen that morning, despite some guys who have written books and are now out campaigning for Biden, Officer Harry Dunn, for one, he claims that there was a morning roll call briefing in the large theater in the visitor center of the Capitol where the big screen is. This is very descriptively given to us in his own book about January 6th, except for one problem. He lied. Never happened.
Never happened.
I have the videos.
Yeah.
And we're going to be releasing that here in just a couple of weeks. So we're gonna actually release a day in the life of Harry Dunn mini documentary through the Blaze.
Now he's I've watched a bunch of stuff that you've been doing with the Blaze, and he appears to have made up all sorts of stories out of whole cloth.
He has it's easy to call him a pathological liar. I've been threatened by his attorney for making such type statements, to which I've responded, "Great, sue me, take us to court. I'd love to share all of this in open court."
Now he's openly partisan. He's an apparatchik, and he's the standard bearer of the Biden DOJ narrative.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and he just ran for Congress. He was unsuccessful. He did come in second, even though he outraised all of the other combined.
I saw that you were happy about that.
About 5 times. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that we had a part in taking him out, because he had received the endorsement of Pelosi and Raskin and so many others. He had received the endorsements of veterans political action committees, and he's not a veteran.
Was this the deal?
Yes.
Yes.
That was supposed to be his payback.
Quid pro quo.
For his perjury before Congress and his perjuries in trials, of which we've been able to prove through our access to these videos and to his testimonies and the conflictions there. And then most importantly, as I said, one of the things that he describes in great detail is this morning roll call briefing with all of what they call their first responders units. He goes into incredible 5 pages in his book of detail about this meeting that never happened. We have the videos of the empty theater all day. Never was attended. Could have happened somewhere else, except it didn't. Now we have the testimonies of the other members of the first responders unit who were telling us we had no roll call briefing that morning. We have trials where cops have been asked under cross-examination, talking about Capitol Police, where they've been asked, did you know what was coming that day? Did you know that there was going to be this massive protest moving over to the Capitol? And their testimonies in trials are, no, we knew nothing about it. We knew something was happening down at the White House. That's it.
That's laughable.
It is.
As someone that has worked with them,
yes,
it's their job to know, and by the way, it's not hard to know.
Right. The only roll call briefings that we knew, or that we now know took place, is some of the CDU units. That's the civil disturbance units, the guys that wear all the heavy duty RoboCop looking gear. Some of those guys did have roll call briefings, and this is where it even gets more interesting. So the Capitol Police took 2 years before they released a copy of the 16-page CDU roll call briefing. 2 years to release it. I took that to some of my CDU sources at Capitol Police. They looked at it, passed it around, all came back to me and said, bullshit, that's not what they told us. This was a CYA document created after the fact.
I want to tell you about this new brand that we love here at Free the People. Our friend Jennifer Say, free speech warrior and truth teller, has started her own athletic clothing brand. It's called XXXY Athletics, and it is the only athletic brand standing up for women's sports. We met Jen when she spoke out against the insanity of COVID lockdowns and school closures, and stood up for our freedoms. She risked her reputation to do the right thing, and she's doing it again now. A lot of other brands out there claim to champion women, but only Jen actually does it with her new brand, XXXY Athletics. As a former elite gymnast, she was the 1986 national champion. She knows the importance of protecting Title IX. And as the former Levi's brand president, she knows a thing or two about great products. XXXY Athletics just launched their performance wear for both men and women, including cool t-shirts, bike shorts, and leggings. So check it out at xx-xyathletics.com or thetruthfits.com. Don't give your money to athletic brands who don't share your values. Give it to a brand that speaks truth, stands up for free speech, and puts quality first. Use the code Kibbe75 and you'll get free shipping with orders of $75 or more. Finally, an athletic brand with a cause you can get behind. Go show XXXY Athletics some love. Wear the truth out loud. Go to xx-xyathletics.com and use the code Kibbe75. That's KIBBE75 to order. Do it now. You teased the project that you're releasing on the Blaze. Tell us what you can about that. This will run about the same time, so but assume that it hasn't run yet, so don't give away the family secrets.
Yeah. So the latest edition of our series on the truth about January 6th is what we're calling A Day in the Life of Harry Dunn. Harry Dunn's a key figure because he became famous originally from an anonymous BuzzFeed interview that he gave in the days following January 6th, in which he claimed that he had been chanted at with the N-word by as many as, quote unquote, 20, 40, 50 people were chanting the N-word at him. And he became very famous because of that. Some other cops, because of the style of the way he spoke in the interview, the anonymous interview, they knew it was him, so he kind of felt like he needed to be outed, and so he finally then came out publicly and revealed himself, started telling that story. And I hate using this word inexplicably. I use it far too often in relationship to January 6th, but it is true. But inexplicably, the Capitol Police basically gave him carte blanche to do as many interviews, be as political as he wanted to be, which is not only contrary in every manner to every aspect to policy at the Capitol Police, but some think it's also a violation of the Hatch Act for him to be as political as he has been, being a federal officer. Very anti-Trump, very pro-liberal Democratic in his policies and his speech. But he was able to go out and basically embarked on a media tour, eventually got a book deal, started testifying in the trials, and then the more and more and more he put on the record, the more we realized that this could be a literal bonanza of I can't tell you how tempting it was, but yet then again how fulfilling it was once I did get access to the Capitol CCTV viewing room. And I got access for the first time in May of 23. So this is over 2 years after the event. This is probably something that the people who we'll just suggest for the moment that either planned or allowed January 6th to happen, and the people who put these committee hearings together, and the people who testified falsely in trials, and the people who suborned those perjuries in trial, probably never thought that people like me would get access to the entire treasure trove of Capitol CCTV. And the very first...
Remind people, this was Kevin McCarthy did this
Yes.
When Republicans took the House.
Yeah, so he got control, obviously, in January of 23. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he did was he gave Tucker access. Tucker was planning on a longer series, but we all know what happened. He got shut down and then, of course, ultimately let go by Fox. Immediately after that, though, there was another string of independent journalists who were allowed in, and I was one of them, to the room. And the first thing that I did is I went straight to Harry Dunn. And Harry Dunn's an easy guy to pick out of a crowd. He's 6'7", 350 pounds. He has a very unique, lumbering gait to him. And we started following him, and we started logging down all of the camera numbers and the time codes and the sequences. And then his book came out. I got an advanced copy of his book. We had his trial transcript testimonies. We had his congressional testimony transcript. And we started overlaying the events as they actually happened with what he claimed. And man, it's unbelievable, but virtually nothing that he says that he did, participated in, or witnessed that day is true. He actually spent most of the day hiding from the crowd, hiding from the violence, disappearing into the bowels of the Capitol where there are no cameras. He has multiple testimonies and interviews where he talks about the violence that he himself engaged in. His knuckles were bloodied. He was covered head to toe in all manner of chemical sprays and irritants. Soaked, as a matter of fact, is the way he described it. None of that's true. He actually never touched any protester. He spent most of his day, as I said, hiding from them.
So I want to get into the narrative here, because, I mean, he's clearly... I mean, my assumption is he's not just a guy telling a fantastical story. He's the messenger of an official narrative that that certainly the Democrats wanted to create.
Yeah.
Who's he working for?
He has worked very closely with Jamie Raskin, who was obviously on that committee. As a matter of fact, Jamie Raskin put him up to an actual action in a month or two after January 6th, where he distributed an anonymous letter on Capitol Police letterhead, using Raskin's chief of staff to make that distribution. He was encouraged by Raskin to write that letter. This was basically a terminable, what they call a terminable event, because he was anonymously taking a political position to distribute this letter to every member of Congress, both houses. He drafted it. He drafted it with the assistance of a CNN writer, press pool person there at the Capitol. I've named her already, Whitney Wild. Took it back to Raskin's office. I'm sorry, first he utilized not only Capitol Police letterhead, but then Capitol Police copying machines to make the copies. So he initiated a deceptive event from the get-go. That's a terminable event. Then, when questioned about it, the very next day, because the guy's not smart, he was using Capitol Police copy machines, which leave a fingerprint, and so he was found out by his command the next day, and then he lied about it first. So he should have been terminated, which means that he should have never been able to testify in trials, like against the Oath Keepers. Which also means, because there was disciplinary review and an action, and there was deception that took place in the disciplinary review, there's another rule, national policy, it's called the Lewis List, the Lewis Registry. That information should have been given to the trial defense attorneys under Brady disclosures, and that was withheld by the DOJ. This gets uglier and uglier and uglier the deeper we go into this. And it's not all just on Harry Dunn. There's other characters with equally bad behavior. But in Harry Dunn's case, it is a progression of events. So when you ask who's he working for, he's working for the machine, top to bottom. He's answering to Pelosi, obviously, and then all of her minion and her chain down the chain. And then we have the other event that happened in the first Oath Keepers trial, when Harry Dunn testified against the Oath Keepers, saying that he had a very antagonistic interaction with them in the small rotunda right off the large rotunda of the Capitol, at the top of a staircase, when actually what really happened was that 4 Oath Keepers lined up in front of him, turned their backs to him, and pushed and held protesters to keep him off of them, which in his first FBI interview in March of 21, he testified to it being a positive interaction with him. Then they brought him back in August, changed the story 180 degrees. And to make the change in story fit, they brought in another officer by the name of Special Agent David Lazarus, head of Nancy Pelosi's security detail, to buttress up Harry Dunn's false version of events now. And what Lazarus testified to is that he passed by the interaction, the negative, highly antagonistic interaction between Harry Dunn and those 4 Oath Keepers 3 or 4 times while he was rescuing staffers out of Pelosi's office. The problem with David Lazarus's story is, once again, he had no idea that I would get access to the Capitol CCTV cameras. He was in another building when this interaction took place. He wasn't even there.
Those pesky cameras.
Yeah. So David Lazarus and Harry Dunn did not come up with this story on their own.
Right.
This was a created perjury. It was a suborned perjury. Now the question is who did that?
So I want to get to your part of this story, because you're part of this narrative. But the question I've had, and I don't know the answer yet, is this a confluence of events where riled up activists started breaking down the barriers and eventually breaking windows, and did Pelosi et al. See an opportunity there, or was this a setup?
Either or both. Here's what I believe, and I've been open to changing, and I say this quite often in my own progression of how my own narrative and my own observations.
The investigation goes on.
That's right, right. And sometimes you learn new things, which you have to take a step back and go, okay, I got that wrong. I only had one camera angle. Now I've got 5 camera angles. I can interpret this quite a bit differently now. So, but to answer your question specifically, was it set up? Was it allowed to happen? And then the narrative. Let's kind of go in reverse. This was the largest narrative capture, most successful narrative capture by the left, probably in this country's history. We had seen for how many generations the violent protests happen on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Conservatives work. They don't go. They're not paid and bust in to create negative events on camera. This is not what they do. But on January 6th, 2021, on a cold Wednesday morning, there's hundreds of thousands of these people there on a Wednesday, not a Saturday. And I looked at my colleague, who I told you I was there with, when we were down at the Washington Monument lawn, and as I did a 360 camera, shot of this sea of people on all sides, I asked him, I said, why are these people here? I mean, this is a Wednesday. Are these people still not at work because of COVID? Is it just the election, controversy? Is it a combination of the two? Is this a pent-up anger, or what is this? I just thought it was highly unusual to see that many quote-unquote right-wing conservatives on a Wednesday, a work day. And so that's where we start from. But then the other thing that has to be dispelled is this myth that thousands of people were attacking Capitol and Metro PD police and storming the Capitol. That is an absolute narrative lie. There's only between 200 and 300 people that actually did violence and property damage out of hundreds of thousands. And that has to be, we have to say that over and over and over again. Only 200 to 300 by the Department of Justice own estimation. I actually heard, I believe it was Matthew Graves doing, he's the U.S. attorney here in D.C. In his own statement, he said that they estimated about 225 people did violence. Now, there's more people have been charged than that with violent or disruptive activity or interfering with law enforcement, or maybe they got caught up in a scrum or something like that, so they were aiding and abetting. There's all kinds of language around that, but actually only about between 200 and 300, let's say, actually did violence. So we have to know who those 200 to 300 people were. Why were they there? Why were they there before Trump ever spoke? Why were those barricades breached before Trump ever finished his speech? Why were they not at Trump's speech? Why was Ray Epps, who said that he came to the Capitol to support his president, Trump, why did he not attend the speech? Why was he at the first barricade breach and the second barricade breach? Tip of the spear on both. These questions are fair questions. And when we start learning the answers, we start figuring out, okay, was it allowed to happen or was it a setup? My belief is that there were elements that were intent upon this happening, and then there were elements that were waiting to see if it would, and then they allowed it to happen in stages. Pull back a little bit more. I actually called it, I can't remember whether it was in my first article or my second article that I wrote after January 6th. I called it a rope-a-dope move. Let them in a little bit more. Now we got them. And that's what they did.
So for context, and I think it might be relevant as I hear more of the story that you're telling, but 2010, September 12th, March on Washington. We started at Freedom Plaza, marched down Pennsylvania Avenue to the other side of the Capitol, overlooking the mall, and we learned that morning, and the crowd was so much bigger than anyone anticipated. So that I will say that the Capitol Police and the Park Police were caught off guard. We were caught off guard. we thought we'd have 10,000, and we had somewhere close to 1 million people. So it just pure chaos. The metro shut down, and they started the march at the request of the Capitol Hill Police. They asked us to start hour and a half early, something like that. But there was no violence. It was all cooperative. By all accounts, the police involved were helpful. But we learned once we got up there, large crowd, there's not enough room for everybody. Nancy Pelosi wouldn't let the activists, she blocked, and I was told this by people that know, she blocked the activists from being on the mall. So if you look at the picture of that day, it's all around the Capitol. It's not down the mall. So in some ways, perhaps they decided on that day, like, wow, this is real. We're gonna have to do something about it. But there was none of these shenanigans going on. Like in our experience, everyone was cooperating to make sure that everyone was safe. No one was going to get hurt. And of course, these activists were, if anything, they were thanking the police for helping keep it safe.
Well, there's a problem, and here's the difference.
Yeah.
You were interacting with law enforcement early on, actually even honoring their request to start the march early.
Right.
I started running camera at 9:30 a.m., periodically through the entire morning. Not one cop ever enters the frame of my camera. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people are arriving after I started running camera. No cops anywhere.
There were officers everywhere when we were doing our thing.
When we started walking about halfway through Trump's speech towards the Capitol, running camera, not a single cop ever is captured. Not one.
Yeah.
Not of any type.
Yeah.
Not Park Police, not MPD, not Capitol Police. We get to the, as I said, by the time we get to the reflection pool, we were unaware that things were already happening, that violence was already taking place, that barricades had already been breached. But we were hearing the sirens. We were actually seeing smoke and could hear flashbangs, and then I saw the officers streaming down with their fluorescent vests on. And that's the first time I saw cops all day.
Yeah.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool.
So I want to go back to January of 23. Kevin McCarthy releases all of this footage. I assume you had been reporting on this since the day of January 6th, but you get a hold of this footage and you start building out this counter narrative that directly undermines what the Biden administration, Department of Justice, Capitol Hill Police are saying. When did they start suggesting to you that you were in trouble?
I got my first call from the FBI in July of 21, so only 6 months after January 6th. And the officer, Special Agent Doss from Raleigh field office there, he called me about 10 o'clock in the morning and said, "Hi, this is Special Agent Doss with FBI." First words out of my mouth was, "What took you so long? I've been expecting this call for quite some time." And he laughed, and then we started working on scheduling a meeting. We scheduled our cooperative interview in August of 21, month later, with my attorney. Actually, I turned that over to him. I should give you one interesting aside. I was actually speaking at a Libertarian Party event in Reston, Virginia, the next night on a Friday evening in July of 21. And the FBI officer says, "Hey, I see you're going to be up here in the area in D.C., and I was just wondering if you were going to be there early enough, maybe you could sit down with a couple of our guys and have a conversation about your day on January 6th. I said, "Yeah, actually, I'm going to be there early, but unfortunately, my attorney won't be able to be there," which, of course, is always the correct response when you get a call from the FBI. And he goes, "Oh, okay, well, we'll work that out with him." I said, "Well, I'll give him your number, and I'll let him handle it from here," which is exactly what I did. And so they scheduled the first cooperative interview in August, And when my attorney and I arrived at the field office there, the two agents that met us at the door said, "We've got a problem. We may not be able to do this interview today. Give us 10 minutes. We'll be right back out. Have a seat in the lounge." And we'd gone through security and all of that already. So they went back off into the bowels of the office there, and it took about a half hour before they came back. So they come back. We stand up. They said, "Hey, here's the thing. So we just got a call from D.C. We can't do the interview because of your status as a member of the press. We have to have express written permission from the Attorney General's office of the United States in order to interview a member of the press." I didn't even know that there was such a thing in the Code of Federal Regulations. I certainly found it as soon as I left there. I went and looked it up, and sure enough, they have to have written permission from the AG to interview a member of the press. So they recognized me that day. In fact, somebody in Washington recognized that and called them to abort the interview so that they would not be in violation of the code. So then my attorney entered negotiations with the AG's office for a cooperative sit-down interview. There was a proffer agreement offered. Basically, the in simple terms, in my interview, nothing that I said in the interview could be used against me should I ever be taken to court or be charged with a crime unless I perjured myself in the interview. I said, hell yeah, I'll sign that, because I have nothing to lie about. I mean, everything that I did that day is online. I've posted my videos. I've written dozens of stories about it. I got no issues. So we then rescheduled the interview for October. I sat down with the FBI for 2 hours. The conclusion of the interview was, they told me that, look, it's not up to us whether you're charged with a crime or not. That's the Department of Justice. If they decide to move forward, it'll probably just be the 4 basic misdemeanors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because, you did no violence. They even thanked me. Thank you for doing no violence that day, blah, blah, blah. A month later, November 17th, my attorney gets an email from the U.S. Attorney's Office and says, and I quote, "Your client, me, will be charged within the week." And they were going to charge me with interstate racketeering. And just let that steep for a moment. A 20-year felony.
Right.
Interstate racketeering and property damage. The racketeering charge, we can only assume because they never explained it to us, was based on the fact that I, as a journalist, licensed my videos to news agencies all over the world. My videos were used on the HBO documentary, New York Times January 6th documentary. It's been used in a dozen other documentaries, news services all over the country. And yeah, I got paid, not a lot.
That's called journalism, I think.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
And yet they were trying to make the case that I had, because this is what racketeering is first of all, it's a conspiracy, which means that I had to cooperate with somebody else in the planning to cross state lines to attend with foreknowledge an illegal event for the purpose of making a profit off of it. That's what they would have to prove in a racketeering charge, as if I knew that this was going to happen in the first place, or before it ever happened. Well, so what we did is my attorney and I, we drafted a press release, and on the Monday of Thanksgiving week, 2020, we released this press release to about 200 news services and influencers and podcasters, and by that evening, phone was ringing off the wall to do interviews with me. So I started doing interviews that week, Thanksgiving week. And we never heard from them again. They said in their original email, your client will be charged within the week. And then they went away. And we didn't hear from them for 20 months. And then I get a grand jury subpoena in August of 23. Coincidentally, a month after I had started my engagement with Blaze Media.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a coincidence. We have good reasons to believe that it wasn't.
I mean, it looks as if your journalism was puncturing holes in their narrative.
Yes.
And they decided to do something about it.
And we had enough information through sources both at DOJ and inside Capitol Police that they were very unhappy with what we were working on because I had covered every day of the first Oath Keepers trial. I was there in the courthouse here in D.C. for 9 straight weeks every day, and I covered every minute of that trial. And it was there that I learned or became very, very suspicious of the perjuries of these federal officers, and immediately went to work on that afterwards. Began writing stories about it, began doing interviews, began developing sources within the Capitol Police that would get me inside information, et cetera, doing what an investigative journalist does. And then, lo and behold, in May of that year, a couple of months before I ever got a call from Blaze, I'm already in the media room. I'm already releasing information that I'm discovering in the Capitol CCTV viewing room. And then I get this grand jury subpoena in August of last year. When a grand jury subpoenas your work, they're not looking at you for misdemeanor charges. Grand juries are not seated for misdemeanors, only for the potential of a felony. And the only thing that I can surmise is that the grand jury, even a D.C. grand jury, which of course, as you know, they say can indict a ham sandwich, as the saying goes, did not see a felony on my behalf and are committed by me. And so we didn't hear from them again until mid-December. I was actually sitting in Thomas Massey's office when I got the message from my attorney saying you need to call me. And when you get a message like that from your attorney, it's never good. I step out into the hallway there at the Rayburn building and I say, hey, what's going on? He goes, one day I wish I could just call you and tell you won the lottery or something, but that's not what's happening today. They are moving forward. They are going to charge you. They will not tell me what the charges are. Why? He says, because they said, and I quote, you'll tweet it out. Okay. Yeah. Of course I will.
Yeah.
And I've been, I've been punching them hard. I've been calling my U.S. attorney that was on my case, calling her out by name, revealing things that she had done, malpractice of her own in her own job on other cases. I'd been calling out my FBI agents. I'd been calling out the DOJ for suborning this perjury. We already had the stories out about Lazarus and Dunn. All of this is already now. This is all public record. People are not happy with me. And so they told me that I would need to self-present within the week. Blaze went into high gear. I mean, it was unbelievable, the support that I got from those guys. Blessing upon blessing for me. And the exact opposite of what you would expect from a corporation of course, any kind, right? Not those guys. And they backed off again. Within 24 hours, we get another call from the FBI saying, okay, we're going to wait till sometime after Christmas. And we didn't hear from them. And then last week of February this year, they called back and said, okay, time is now. Pick your spot wherever Steve. They knew I was traveling all the time. I mean, I'm rarely at home. And I happened to be in Dallas. And so we determined that I would self-present, turn myself in to the FBI in Dallas, 7 o'clock in the morning. The day before, they sent my attorney an email. I have 5 attorneys now, as things have escalated. They sent one of my attorneys an email and said, Mr. Baker needs to show up at 7 a.m. at the FBI field office in Dallas wearing, and I quote, shorts, a T-shirt, and flip-flops. Well, I knew what that meant. I knew that meant they were going to change me into an orange jumpsuit and put leg chains on me. And they weren't going to tell me what the charges were because I would tweet them out. So I wouldn't even know what the charges were till I'm arrested. And then they become unsealed. And then they have to be unsealed and become public knowledge. So at 7 o'clock, I show up in a suit at the FBI field office. My attorney walks over to the 2 FBI agents that greeted us outside the gate, negotiated that I would not be changed into an orange jumpsuit, but I had to take off my tie, my jacket, my shoelaces, my belt. So I hand all of those over to another one of my attorneys. So I was able to keep my dress shirt and my dress slacks on. And I walked in where they processed me, put me in handcuffs, and then led me famously, as you've seen on that video, out to their car, where they then transferred me in the car with my hands cuffed behind my back on 4 misdemeanors. Now, I still don't know what the charges are, but they know, the cops know, the FBI knows that it's just 4 nonviolent misdemeanor charges. And yet they're treating me this way. Mm-hmm. I asked my attorney, I said, why are they treating me this way? He goes, you know why. He said, you spent the last 3 years poking them in the eye. This is payback. So
it's also a continuation of the narrative.
Yes, of course.
Because they can characterize your behavior in different ways than perhaps the charges reflect.
Yeah. So they transferred me to.
Well, let me ask.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, that had to suck. Like this, because you're powerless at that point.
Right. Oh yeah. No, it's humiliating. And I chatted up the FBI agents as they're doing that, as they're poking me and prodding me and patting me down. They make me take my socks off and make sure I don't have sock bombs on or whatever. They fingerprint me, and I asked them. I said, "So, how often do you do this to nonviolent misdemeanor offenders?" No answer. And I'm serious. Like, have you ever done this to nonviolent misdemeanor offenders before? No answer. They put me in the car, drive me over to the federal courthouse, turn me over to the U.S. Marshals. The U.S. Marshals take me into possession, and now they put the leg chains on me and a belt, belly chain with my wrist chained in the front. And then they put me in a cell with a meth dealer. I was in and out of that cell for about 5 hours. And in the middle of that 5 hours, they marched me in my leg chains into the courtroom before a Dallas federal magistrate. And pure humiliation. There were felony defendants sitting in the gallery of the courtroom with their attorneys in their suits. Felony. I'm nonviolent misdemeanor, and I marched in with drug dealers in leg chains. It hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. As it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So where are you today? That was about 3 months ago.
Yeah,
right?
March 1st.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We've had a series. I think we're up to like 4 or 5 hearings now that we've had. I have my judge assigned. My judge is federal judge, district court judge Christopher Cooper. He's the same judge who 2 weeks before I was arrested held Catherine Herridge of CBS in contempt for not turning over her sources to the federal government as demanded. Same judge. He's the same judge who in Simone Gold's sentencing hearing, if you remember Simone Gold, she's the head of the founder of the Frontline Doctors at the very beginning of the COVID thing. She was the one advocating for alternative treatments. And she was deplatformed. She was scheduled to speak on one of those side stages at the Capitol. Scheduled speaker. Well, of course, when the melee broke out, that didn't happen. She and her bodyguard walked inside the Capitol building, and she delivered her remarks in the rotunda and left. Nonviolent, whatever. She takes a plea deal. This is early on, because she was a high-profile person that obviously the feds want to make an example out of. In her plea deal, she accepted a 60-day prison sentence. And in her sentencing hearing, Judge Cooper famously said, and I can quote it verbatim, he said, January 6th was about a lot of things. It ain't about the First Amendment. He said ain't. He said, but it ain't about the First Amendment. To which I say, Matt, for 99.9998% of the people that came to that event that day, it was 100% about the effing First Amendment.
Of course. That's like, and again, like going back to the experiences, I view this as a continuum of escalation against people trying to peacefully petition their government for redress of grievances. Mm-hmm. And the mistakes made on January 6th, and you've documented these, and I've very sharply pointed out the very important mistakes that activists made. This, to me, like, what happens if journalists like you are not in the Capitol? What happens if Kevin McCarthy doesn't actually release the tapes?
Yeah.
We have no access to the truth. We're completely dependent on a partisan government narrative to tell us what happened. By the way, like, to make sure it doesn't happen again, we need to know what actually happened. So that this is just it's an amazing story. I want to ask one last question, and I assume you've looked at this more carefully than me, but it takes one Google search to find activists from the Women's March taking over the Senate Hart Building, and I guarantee you they didn't go through security.
Right.
And that was no big deal. Is that an insurrection?
Matt, we can give dozens of examples of that. You know, just even recently, the Palestinian protests in which federal officers were assaulted and had to retreat from the assailants. How many were charged? 0. How about January 20th, 2017? Over 300 people were arrested for violence in the aftermath of Trump's inauguration. Every single one of those charges were dismissed or dropped. Or the few that made it to court, D.C. jury was either hung or acquitted them. It's the exact opposite with January 6th defendants. They're arresting nonviolent misdemeanor defendants, accused. They're SWAT raiding them at their homes, the FBI. Journalist, J.D. Rivera from Pensacola. Over 20 agents SWAT raid him. He's a professional videographer who was contracted that day by an actual mainstream television news station in Mobile, Alabama. Nonviolent, went through, followed the story where the story went, just as any pro would do, went home. He gets SWAT raided. The FBI never in the history of the FBI, the 100-year history of the FBI, have they ever swatted a misdemeanor defendant until January 6th. It's not what they do. FBI doesn't even investigate misdemeanor offenses. But they investigated me for over 3 years before they put leg chains on me. And now that my trial is coming up, I'm seeing all this discovery in the doc. I now see when they first started coming over and visiting my house and logging down my license plate number and tracking me. I'm seeing where they've been tracking my phone calls. They're looking at international phone calls I made all the way back to 2010. I'm seeing all of this. I'm seeing that they have an assigned confidential human source reading my blog, the part behind my paywall. FBI is paying for a subscription to my, they're supporting me. So yeah, I got that going for me.
That's a win.
Yeah. $5 a month off the FBI.
Yeah.
But one other little thing I forgot to tell you about my judge, Christopher Cooper. He had a very unique officiant for his wedding. When Christopher Cooper was married in 1999, the officiant of his wedding ceremony was none other than current Attorney General Merrick Garland.
Fascinating.
Coincidence? Yet again?
So you are a libertarian.
Yep.
You are a journalist. You were following this story. How does this experience, I mean, if anything, it probably makes you more radically libertarian, but to have the government wield this kind of unchecked power on you. But where are you today? Because you're like, and I should add this myself, like I've never particularly been a Trump guy.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not a partisan. I'm a libertarian as well.
Yeah.
But there's something rotten going on here. I'm starting to learn this, and so much I've learned from Thomas Massey digging, and you work with him and all that. But what's your read on? Oh, I should add context to this conversation. Julian Assange finally is released yesterday.
Yeah.
And he took a plea deal. I haven't looked at what he agreed to admit to. Another journalist, whistleblower. You're a whistleblower. What do we do here? Like this just seems unchecked power.
Yeah. All right. So
That's a big question.
It's very easy to get into the politics of how libertarians are supposed to vote or not vote, or what a wasted vote is, or blah 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 blah. For the first time in my life, Matt, I am a single issue voter. Never been a single issue voter in my life.
I believe that. Yeah.
There's only one candidate who has promised to pardon all nonviolent misdemeanor offenders January 6th. I'm voting for that guy. The government made me do that.
Right.
Okay. They drove me in that direction for this year's election. But the government weaponized me against them in March of 2020. Because, see, my other career is I've been a lifelong professional musician. 90% of my income stream before the COVID lockdowns was live music. I had 4 bands of my own. I've managed a couple of acts. All of that is shut down. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That was amusing. I sat on my front porch with a cigar and my laptop and an adult beverage and watched the empty streets of downtown Raleigh, where I live. And then all of a sudden I knew that 2 weeks after it became 2 months, I went, holy crap, this could become 2 years. And I changed. And so I had been doing this journalism thing on the side for over 20 years as a hobby, a passion. And the way I like to typically describe it is that I moved my journalism to the captain seat of my life, and I moved the music to the co-pilot seat of my life. And I switched gears. And that's exactly what I did. I became much more aggressive in monetizing my writing, my blog, and all that stuff that was not essential to me at the time. And so, as I said earlier, when we first began, when January 6th came along, it was just an extension now of the change in my life. And so I live 4 hours from D.C. Why not be here for the biggest event in the country that day? The president said it was going to be wild. I didn't know how wild it was going to be, and I wasn't a Trump supporter. And when the FBI interviewed me, they brought up one of the things that I said in the aftermath of January 6th in my FBI interview. They said, you were doing a podcast or live stream from your room that night in Arlington, by the way, not in D.C., not inside a restricted space. And you were talking about seeing the damage that had been done in Nancy Pelosi's office, and that you captured it on video. And you said, and they're looking at their paper so they could quote me, you said, it couldn't have happened to a more deserving bitch. Why did you say that? To which I immediately answered them, and I said, because it wasn't McConnell's office. I said, if it had been in McConnell's office, I said, it couldn't have happened to a more deserving bastard. And I specifically said, what part of me being a libertarian do you not yet understand? I don't care which side I'm talking about. The problem in D.C. is what's going on under that dome.
Right.
Not what's happening on either side of the political aisle.
All right. So you have this new expose coming out on BlazeTV. By the way, they are distributing my series, which I'm not sure that I could even publish on YouTube if I wanted to, called The Coverup.
Right.
Which I suspect we have similar passions about that as well.
Yeah.
When does it come out, and how do people find your work on the Blaze and elsewhere where you're publishing this investigation and others?
Yeah, the best thing obviously is to go to the Blaze, and the Blaze has actually given me a unique URL. It's actually theblaze.com/truth. Now that's where they're publishing all of my articles and videos on January 6th. Now, other articles on other topics are just generally found under my name, Steve Baker. And then, of course, on YouTube, they even have a playlist for our videos, the Truth About January 6th series that we have ongoing. My blog is on locals, and it's really easy. I've got a short URL. It's TPC, the number 4 USA, TPC, the number 4 USA.com. I take you straight to my locals blog. It's free to subscribe, but there is a way to support my work there as well. And of course, same handle on Facebook and X, TPC4USA. And so that's the best way to find me. And then of course, one thing about your series that I really appreciate, because it is all connected, is your series really points to the same source that I'm discovering is the source of the problem for January 6th, which is it was a military operation.
Mm-hmm.
This was an event created by the DOD. And the deeper we get into this investigation, just as you have found, the closer we're getting to the realization that that's the origins of what went wrong on January 6th.
Yeah. I want to have you back and talk about COVID, because this, as you know, has been my obsession since they shut down the world in March of 2020. I was not a musician, but I certainly know musicians. For better or worse, I was part of the laptop class, so I was able to continue to do my work. And we took advantage of traveling this beautiful country when most people weren't.
Yeah.
So we made the best of it. But I'd love to have you back on, and we'll uncover the COVID cover-up as well.
I would love to. Would love to compare notes.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.